Hey guys, welcome back to another video here on my second channel, Mike VA Weather. This is Mike from Mike7493, and recently, if you followed me on Twitter, you noticed that I went on a little boating trip with my dad and my dog. We have a 22-foot Grady White boat. Grady Whites are awesome. It's not the hugest boat in the world, but it has a cabin and it's big enough to sleep on or spend a weekend on. And it can take some pretty choppy weather at the same time, and it's perfect and all this stuff. And I can talk more about the boat later when we see some of the pictures of it. But I felt that this kind of like fit really well with my second channel stuff. I wanted something to put on my second channel. I wanted to kind of morph more into more activity on that channel, and I really enjoyed this trip. This was actually my third time doing this boating trip, and I felt like sharing with you guys, showing off some of the things. I didn't take as many pictures as I wish I would have. I think I had like 80 or something. I was hoping for a bit more of some things in between. I noticed that I missed. I noticed that I Snapchatted my friends a whole bunch of stuff about it and Snapchatted some videos. So I unfortunately don't have as much as I wish I had, but I think this will cover it. This is actually a scan-in from a brochure that we got from some boating place a long time ago, like when we first got the boat. This is my third time doing the trip. It's called the Carolina Loop, and I did it in 5th grade, I did it in 8th grade, and I'm doing it now my senior year. And we did it a lot shorter this time, a little bit different. It was a whole bunch of circumstances going on that I can also talk about a little bit later. But this is the map. To give you guys a little geographic perspective, this is Tidewater, Virginia, and northeast North Carolina. So the Virginia-North Carolina border is right there, as you can see. I'm also have these playing in a slideshow that I'm going to be clicking through. So hopefully this will work out, because I've never tried recording it like this. I had to line all the photos up. It was a little bit of a pain, so I'm hoping to find a better way to do this. But for now, I think this is going to work. This is the Intercoastal Waterway, this red line here. You guys know the Intercoastal Waterway. It's a bunch of government-maintained waterways, both canals, rivers, bays, that are inside, that are not open ocean. So it allows the ease of transport of materials. And it goes from the Gulf Coast, but the main one we're focusing on, this one here, I believe goes from somewhere like around Tampa, and it goes into Norfolk, and then from Norfolk I think it goes up into Maryland, and I believe it goes all the way up into Boston. But Norfolk is kind of like the central point where I think the buoys count down to 0 and then they count back up, and it's kind of like considered the changing point between two separate sections in it. But the interesting thing about this part here is the Intercoastal Waterway actually splits into two directions and comes back together here in Virginia and North Carolina. And that was because there was the old Dismal Swamp Canal, and they refurbished the Dismal Swamp Canal, but right after they refurbished it and made it bigger, the Albemarle and Chesapeake Canal opened up, and because that opened up, it allowed for bigger barges and more modern ships, so they closed down the Dismal Swamp and used that one. But then they made the Great Dismal Swamp a national wildlife refuge, and because they did that, they wanted to open the canal back up, and they decided to open up and actually fund both. And all of this stuff along the Intercoastal Waterway is run by the Army Corps of Engineers. Okay, so we started actually up here in Hampton. I know you can't see because this little thing comes down, but we actually started up here in a little river here and put our boat in here. And what we did was we came across the James River here, down the Elizabeth River through the Norfolk Naval Station, down through Norfolk. Then we took a hard right, and most people actually do it the other direction apparently, but we do it counterclockwise because we like to stay in Coinjock. We wanted to stay in Elizabeth City the first time we did it, and we realized Coinjock was a little bit nicer place to stay back at the time. But we came here, and there's all these little there's a whole bunch of bridges here, but there's some locks as well. There's 3 locks, and there was like a dozen bridges we had to hit. But anyways, you go through the Dismal Swamp Canal, and then you come down here through the Piscataway River, and then into Elizabeth City, and then you go into the Albemarle Sound. We cut across here, go around the point. I don't know what this river's called here, but you go up. This is the Albemarle part of the canal, a little cut through here, and through Coinjock, and then we come out through Coinjock Bay, the Currituck Sound, around Knott's Island, and then up the North Landing River and through the Chesapeake Canal, and then back up into Norfolk and came all the way back. And it usually can take you about 48 hours. I think we did it in like less than 24 hours, maybe, or exactly 24, I think, because we were hauling butt because we got a late start and there was really bad storms in the afternoon, so we wanted to get out of that. This is a terrible map, but I just wanted to show there's the Virginia Cut and the North Cut, and the North Landing River connects it. And the North Landing River is a very interesting river. Okay, So here we are at the boat lift, the boat ramp, getting ready to put the boat in. Some huge yachts were out of the water, some huge sport fishing boats. Sport fishing is huge down there because you can go right out into the bay or the ocean. There were some boats getting worked on there in the harbor. But this was us leaving the marina. I forget whatever that river's called, but we're going up into the James River and crossing the mouth of the James River into Norfolk. The next couple pictures are just a bunch of. It's a huge. If those of you in the United States, you know, especially in the Mid-Atlantic and the Eastern Coast, you know how big of a port and a naval station and an Air Force station Tidewater, Virginia is. But if you're outside the United States, Norfolk, Newport News, Virginia Beach is one of the biggest ports in the United States, both for shipping and freight, and both for the United States Navy. It's one of their biggest bases, and for the United States Air Force. So they're a little bit fuzzy here because we were far away, and I was trying to zoom in, and it wasn't terribly rough. I mean, it was a little choppy, but I was rocking a little bit. There's some of our aircraft carriers. This ship was getting worked on in the port. Let me go back really quick to the map. You can see all this stuff that's grayed out is military stuff. So we come along all these docks. This is all gray in here, along a whole bunch of military docks here. So that's where all the military stuff comes from. This looks like the ship has difficulty being tracked by radar. I think that's why it's so smooth in. It's really interesting. It's hollow in the inside. I think there's a picture you'll be able to see it later, but it's hollow in the inside for like hovercrafts and tanks for it to deploy those. I think mostly hovercrafts. Again, there's some aircraft carriers. Those things are huge. We're like a mile away from those right now. A whole bunch of ships. This is a little bit farther up the river. It was just kind of like an abandoned place. That's an old military boat. All the Navy boats had like random letters on it, and they were all like random letters and then a bunch of numbers, and we couldn't figure out what those were. And this was a YRBM, and they had a bunch of numbers. And apparently they were used in the Vietnam War. It stands for Yard Repair, Berthing, and Messing. And you can see it looks like it's literally just a bunch of hotel-like rooms, motel rooms on the side of that, and then on top is a place as a mess hall for them to eat on the very top under that roof where they were cooking. And there was one of them we went past, they were actually staying on that. They stay on those. They don't really use them in battle anymore, but they stay on those when they're working on the ships, like repairing this ship in the harbor. The people on this boat here were staying on one around the corner, all the Navy personnel. So that was kind of an interesting thing I learned off of. I took that because that was a humongous boat. We were a little far away from that. But yeah, you can see from this angle it's hollow underneath. And again, sorry about the quality. There's some here that'll be better, but my phone, I'm still trying to figure out how to take pictures with it. I never do. Some ridiculously huge domes that were some military thing. I don't know, some military thing. They're also doing a bunch of construction. There's a couple bridges they were building up because they're getting bigger traffic in there. Almost all of the bridges along this trip are drawbridges, just because it's very flat land down there, so it's easier just to have drawbridges. And then the couple big interstates, even Interstate 64, one of the biggest interstates down there, has a drawbridge on it. So the interstate shuts down for when you get big ships in there, which is kind of interesting. These are interesting tugboats. There's a couple of them going in. You can see the giant cranes in the background for unloading all of those things that go on the back of the trucks. They were stacked up. Like, you know, you would just see like a wall of them way in the distance. They look like little Legos. But what this actually does is when it goes into the dock, those pilings actually go down in the mud, and the ship gets raised out of the water. So it's like its own boat lift. It doesn't have to pull in a boat lift. It just is its own boat lift. And these are the transformer cranes. Don't they look kind of crazy? They have like half of them on the roof, half of them down below. They just like creepy. They're like transformers. That was kind of interesting. This is us that starts to narrow down a little bit, get a little bit swampy, because just in the distance is the start of the Dismal Swamp. The Great Dismal Swamp, pardon me. It actually is part of North Carolina and Virginia, but the North Carolina section is only a state park, and the Virginia section is a national park. I believe this was 264 or 164. This is actually a fixed bridge, just because they built it up so ridiculously tall. It's like 80 feet up or something like that. That's a famous battleship. God, I should know what it's called. The USS, I want to say Connecticut, but I know it's not that. That's in downtown Norfolk, I believe. I've actually been on that when I was a little kid. That stays, look at the guns on that thing. But that stays docked there. It's like a little museum now. The guns on that are serious. This was our first little bridge we came to. I believe we could go... No, we went down to that and then we turned around because the locks into the Great Dismal Swamp at Deep Creek only opened like 4 times a day, and we were trying to hit the 11 o'clock one, so then we had like 4 hours to get through the canal. The canal was 22 miles long. I might as well just skip ahead and talk about the canal. But we were trying to get to that, and we missed the 11 o'clock one because we had traffic and a little bit of a late start. So we were going to hit the 1:31, so we went down as far as we could go. We couldn't quite fit under this bridge without having to take down our tarp and our antenna. So we boated down to that, then we boated back to the canal. So you'll see this bridge again later. But there's huge train bridges all along this. There's some pictures of more of those I'll show in a second. This is the biggest crane, like, down in the harbor. That it seemed the biggest because you could get right next to it. You can see it's got a crane, a normal-sized crane. That crane on top is a normal crane. That building's like 3 stories tall. It's a normal crane, and then that crane is ridiculous. I guess it unloads some pretty serious stuff. You can see the little person's thing hanging down up there. This is the Norfolk Southern. It's a huge rail line, just like CSX. It goes through a lot of Virginia. I mean, it goes up into Canada and stuff. But anyway, this is where the trains would pull in underneath of these big black cranes. The trains would pile in with all their cars full of coal, and it would get either unloaded out of the ship or loaded onto the ship. I believe that's an offloading from the ship. I think, maybe not. That might actually be loading on. But I don't see a crane to get it from the. I don't see how they get it from the train to the boat. So I think it's boat to train, and then they train that across places. Some more aircraft carriers in the distance. Those things are humongous. Norfolk Southern again. Again, there's another one of those ships that we saw earlier, some just battleships and cruisers to the left, but then you see that one's hollowed out for hovercraft. This bridge we went under, we were really confused because we're like, well, I don't remember this bridge being here. Well, we remember the older bridge. The bridge below it, the last time we were here 4 or 5 years ago, was a really low bridge that we had to wait to open. But you can see they built a big one on top, and this one, yeah, here it is. This is us under it again. It looked kind of cool. This train bridge was here, but this big one, it actually goes up, and we actually came back and got to see it. It rises up versus opening like a drawbridge, like both sides. It just slid up for some sailboats to go underneath. It went up like this one. This is a train bridge. These huge concrete blocks are the counterweights for it. And then we've seen that come down. Last time we had to sit behind it for like 45 minutes because it came down and this slow-moving train packed full of stuff was going across. Just some more construction stuff going on, a whole bunch of cranes. We're building something. That's Interstate 64. That's that big drawbridge. I think it has like 78 feet of clearance on average, but that actually had to open. As we were driving into Norfolk, there was an alert on the radio. It said at 9 a.m. We didn't get there till like 10, but at 9 a.m. Interstate 64 was shutting down because that bridge had to open because some big freighter or something was coming in. I think. It just had the most monotonous noise ever. It was like, and you only heard it directly underneath of it because you could sit under there and you'd watch huge semis and little cars be zipping above you 70 feet in the air. Kind of unique. So anyways, right at that bridge, you take a hard right and you go up a little creek and you'll go into the Dismal Swamp Canal. If you continue straight, you go on the new part of the Intercoastal Waterway. This is the old part. This is the Great Dismal Swamp. This is Deep Creek Lock. You can see that lock back there. It's a really fuzzy picture. I apologize about that. The gates opened, we pulled in, and it takes about like 10 minutes to fill up. It's a total elevation change of 8 feet, 8.5 feet. In this case, it raises you up into the swamp. So this is again out front of us. He was draining it, the gates opened, and we went inside, and you can see we then filled up 8 feet, and you can see where we were down there, and now we were up here. We were the only boat in there. But this is Dismal Swamp Canal, the Great Dismal Swamp Canal. It was established in 1805, and it is a national park, and run by the Army Corps of Engineers. It has a lock at either side, and then it has also a fixed bridge that goes across it, and then it has 2 low drawbridges immediately after the lock. So the guy lets us out of the lock, he drives down in his car to the drawbridge and then opens the drawbridge, and then we're down at the drawbridge, and then he closes it behind us and we go down. Then there's a fixed bridge that gives you like 60 feet of clearance, so you don't have to worry about. But there we are again. We're filled up at the top, and there is the canal ahead of us. So this is the drawbridge that he opened. It didn't like open any more than that. You pulled under, but you can see like there was a car like sitting right on the other side of that railroad gate. So it's a small little town that this road goes through. Here's the canal. It gets narrower than this at parts, and it has an average depth depth of, I believe, about 8 feet, but most of the time you're running through like 6 feet, and the water level changes. This canal is filled by Lake Drummond, which is almost a perfectly circular lake in the middle of the swamp. They don't really know how it got its name. They say it was because of some General Drummond or some governor of North Carolina, but they're not really sure on that. They don't even know how the lake formed. They think it was either a meteorite or a tectonic shift in the plates, or a bog fire in the peat underneath it just kind of burned out from the center in kind of a circle, and then it sunk in, because the lake only gets about 4 or 5 feet deep at the maximum point, but it's a huge lake, and that goes over a spillway and fills the canal. The canal was surveyed by George Washington and a bunch of other people in the late 1700s and built in the 1800s. And at first it was only for flatboats to be taken into it, but it then got refurbished in like the early 1900s into something bigger, into what it is now, and it just has continued to be maintained. This is the fixed bridge. A ways down it. You can see way in the distance there's a little sailboat that's waiting for the drawbridge to open. The drawbridge was opening at 3. Because if you don't make it out of the canal at 3, you have to dock at a little, you can either go up the feeder ditch right to, which is a really shallow, tiny little ditch, only about 3 feet deep. But we've taken our boat up it before, and you can go up to Lake Drummond, and at Lake Drummond there's a little campground there. It's got some little cabins, some little screened-in cabins, and you can set up a tent and dock your boat or your kayaks there. And you're secluded. Like, the only way to get out of there is on your boat. So as much as like, warning, visit at your own risk. It was cool. We went up there. We almost spent the night there because we got there at 1:30, and now it's supposed to be no wake going through it. Yeah, we have a Yamaha 200 horsepower engine. We can hit like 43 miles an hour wide open. Now, we weren't going 40, we were going like 20, because it's 22 miles long, and we had to get to the end in like an hour and a half, because, you know, it takes a half hour for the lock from 1:30, so we really didn't get underway till 2, and we had to get away from the guy, because the guy's like, no wake, you got to go 6 knots. The reason why there's not a wake is, instead of us going like 10, we have a huge wake, because the stern is sunk in the water, but when you're faster it's on top, and the wake is not too terrible. But the reason they don't have you do that is because, one, there's logs all over the place in this thing, but more because what happens is the weight goes out, it hits the side and hits all the brush, and then when it slowly comes back in, it'll drag the logs from the edge and the dead branches on the edge of the swamp canal, and it'll drag them into the middle for the boats behind you to hit. Now, we knew there wasn't any boats behind us. We were the last one in the canal, and we had to get to the other side by 3. Otherwise, we were going to go up to the feeder ditch, or we were going to stay at the visitor center right across the border in North Carolina, because we actually cross into North Carolina at this point. But we had to get there, so we kind of opened up a couple times for like 5 minutes each to knock out a couple miles, and ended up getting there just about at time. It's a fixed bridge again. Because at the end of the canal, where there's another drawbridge, I don't have a picture of that, but there's yet another drawbridge, just like the first one. And it's this little rural kind of rundown town, and these people's houses are right at the water level, and it's really interesting, because they all live on the canal. The water was like glass at this point. You saw in this picture that the water looks brown. I should mention this. Sorry, I'm throwing facts out everywhere. I thought this was super interesting. The water has tannin in it, and because it's in a swamp, the water's a little bit more acidic than normal because of all the dead decomposition going on. So the water has a very low oxygen level, so there's still life in it, but there's not like huge giant fish and algae and a whole bunch of stuff living in the water. So what this was used for was, back in the day when the settlers would go to Europe across, when it would take 3 months to go on their ship, they would bottle this water up, and they'd put this water in their barrels to take over, because the water wouldn't go bad, because it didn't have things living in it. It was just water and had a little bit of tan and a little bit more acidic, but that's not a problem. Like, it's not a problem to human beings. So they would bottle this up on like the normal water that's always got algae and plankton and just a whole bunch of living amoebas and stuff in it that would cause the water to go bad after 2 months of being out at sea. It's kind of interesting. Interesting fact. Well, we pulled in this other lock. We were with the sailboat. The last one, we made it just in time to get out of there. They were unsuspecting that we had just entered the swamp canal an hour and 2 hours earlier. But that sign there has a whole bunch of facts. It's like Miami's 900 miles south. You know, Boston's like, 700, 800 miles north. So that was kind of cool. And it takes 8 minutes to drain it. When it's filling up, it's really turbulent in there. It's like pouring the water in. And when it's taking out, it's really quite calm, and it takes a little bit longer. So here we are. We're dropping the 9 feet. You can see the water level amount that we've dropped. The gates are opening, and we are pulling out. The first, 90% of the drainage in the lock takes the same amount of time as like the last 10% because it all uses gravity. So at first it's pouring out quickly, but then to get that last foot or that last 6 inches will take the longest amount of time. Alright, here we are. We're in the Pasquatonic River. I don't remember what it's called. Patuskent, something like that. Some southern name. And it's very swamp-like. It's one of the Dismal Swamp Canal and these rivers are blackwater rivers with the Tannin in. There's very few. The Amazon River is the biggest one. There's a couple down in Alabama and Mississippi, and then there's this one here in Virginia and North Carolina. So it's filled with like thick trees on the side and mangroves and a bunch of cool looking root type trees. It was really you zigzag left and right and swirling, and I can see why they built a new one because this was like hard to turn in our boat and make these turns, at 20 miles an hour. So I can imagine it being very difficult to get barges up in here, much more difficult than the other part of the canal. So I can see why the other reason they wanted to change that. Here's my dog Smokee. Smokee with 2 E's, Smokee. He's a black. He's like 4 years old now, 3 years, and he's a black. We think he's a German Shepherd and Chow mix, which is kind of interesting. He's got spotted tongue. We think he has a pigment disorder, the opposite of an albino, where he's got too much pigment because like his tongue was completely pink and he was a little bit lighter, and he's just turned black, and his tongue is in the process of turning all black, and his eyes are like all black. So he gets a little hot in the sun. It was like 80 that day. So you can see he was getting a little bit hot. He was chilling. Alright, we're leaving. This goes into Elizabeth City. There was another drawbridge that we were able to go under, and then you could either go into the harbor of Elizabeth City where we stayed and ate and dinner before, but we needed to get going because by this point it was like 5 o'clock, and we had to get around the Albemarle Sound to get up into Coinjock by sunset so we could dock. So we had it wide open. You can see it's not too rough. It was a pretty breezy day, and there was no small craft advisories yet, but as we were at this point, we got our radio went off, and it was like the Coast Guard and the National Weather Service had issued small craft advisories, but they didn't go in effect until midnight. So we were still fine. The winds were still out of the southwest, and as soon as the winds shifted to the southeast and came right up the bay, it was going to get really choppy and real bad. So we knew we had to make the crossing tonight, and that's why we were rushing through the Dismal Swamp, because we had to do the crossing tonight. If we didn't do it tonight, we were going to be stuck in the swamp and just have to go back into Norfolk without doing any other cool stuff. And it is very rough. For those of you that know the Albemarle Sound is an enormous piece of water, and it is notorious for being extremely rough and weather changing. My grandparents had like a 45-foot cruising boat, and they went out there, and all of a sudden, like the rains came in, it was really misty, it was really rough. This was back in the day when there was no GPS. You had plotted yourself out on the maps, and they had no idea where they were. They had no change of direction. The storm got so bad, so they actually had to call the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard station right in Elizabeth City. So they came out on some patrol boats and were able to. They had to escort them back in because the weather conditions were just degrading so rapidly. So we went out there, and both times we had crossed this before, it was extremely rough. The first time was probably the roughest because it was just chopped. There was no rolling waves. It was just the water was really choppy, and it was splashing over like this. And I was really young, and I got like seasick and everything. But this one was fine for 3/4 of the journey because the wind was with us and it was coming across the bay versus up the bay, so the wind had less time to build up waves. Well, about the very last point, I don't want to go all the way back to the map, but we had to round this huge peninsula. We had to go into the heart of the bay to round this. And the wind was coming right up at about 15 to 25 miles an hour, with gusts around 25. So the sea had like a domination period of like 5 to 7 seconds. So we would like gun it, and then you have to ride a couple of the big breakers here. But we got to that point where then the wind was coming up it for like a split second. So we were heading into the wind, and that made it really choppy. And we kind of had to cut out because when you're hitting big breakers, you have to hit them. You have to hit them in a way so that you either hit them head on or you hit them at like a 60-degree angle or 45-degree angle, so you don't want to hit them at the side. So we kind of had to cut out like a triangle, like go out to go back in, if that makes sense. So we had to go like out this way into the bay and then kind of cut back in versus just cutting straight across around the point, just because of the way the waves were breaking. They were probably 3 or 4 feet, maybe approaching 5 feet, some of them. It was pretty rush. I don't know, this picture got a little bit distorted, I think. The wave wasn't that giant, but you can kind of see here they were fairly big waves, and you can see by this, all of them, the Grady White is fantastic at breaking waves because of the way the hull is designed. It's kind of a narrow hull. So it would break the waves, but the waves would splash out, and the wind would blow all the splash back at us. So we were soaked by the end. It's like we were like wringing out our t-shirts by the end of this. So after about an hour of dealing with this chop to get around the point, we got around the bend and into that little river to head up towards Coinjock, back in the Intercoastal waterway. So you can see here, the river keeps winding. There was a couple sharp turns in there that I don't know how barges get into it. But now this is the North Carolina cut. That's the bridge that goes over Coinjock. That picture, that's not supposed to be there. That picture's for later. But that's the bridge in Coinjock. We go under that, and you can see up ahead is the marina. The marina was packed. Usually when we're there this time of year, we even go later into the year or earlier in the year. You can dock up in marina. It's got a really good restaurant. They have amazing steaks, and it's a fancy restaurant. We had like some nicer clothes to put on to go in there and eat at the marina. I mean, look at these boats. My dog was like, we're finally out of that stuff. He had to grow his sea legs. I mean, some of these boats were like 60 feet, 80 feet, and all of their hull, like the hull of the boat was hanging over the bow of the boat was hanging over the stern of the other boats. Like if you were on the back deck of these other boats, you had the hull of the bow above you of these other boats. Like it was packed. There was not a single spot left for boats. So we're like, crap. So we ended up going upriver just a bit more. We knew there was a public boat landing, so we ended up docking at that in a little inlet, and it was probably better that way because the sun was just setting, and we had our Coleman grill and stuff. So we knew if we brought it just in case we had to cook out ourselves, which we ended up doing. Yep, there's some internal shots of the boat, but we knew it was going to be a windy night, so we were in an inlet, in a canal, so it ended up working out that we were a little bit more protected. However, we were just a little bit too protected because we had to rush into the cabin at like 8 o'clock when the sun set because the mosquitoes swarmed because we were in a little swampy inlet. So the mosquitoes were swarming us. So we went into the cabin, and luckily it wasn't too bad at first. It was a little breezy, but then the wind kind of died down in there, so it got really hot and the mosquitoes were swarming. But then the wind picked up again about 1, 2 o'clock, so we ended up cooling off and being able to sleep. But because we couldn't really sleep well because it was just hot and mosquitoes and it was just a little miserable and rushed and put together, we ended up getting up at the break of dawn. We were up at like 5:30 when the sun was coming up. This was about 6:15 a.m. Going into the Coinjock Bay, leaving our little point. So that was sunrise. Red sky at morning, sailor take warning. Red sky at red sky at night, sailor's delight, something like that. But anyways, red sky at morning. We knew there was big storms for the afternoon, so we're like, good. We're getting an early morning start. We need to be back in Norfolk by noon before the storms start popping up. So by this point, we had rounded the corner. We went across the bay again, super choppy. Knots Island Bay, super choppy, almost as rough as the Albemarle, except for we were going with the wind this time. So that took a little bit. It was kind of rough. It was obviously going to be getting worse as the day went on. But we rounded the bend of the Chesapeake Canal, Albemarle Chesapeake Canal. There's a whole bunch of bridges now, and the bridges only open on the hour, or unless you're a commercial ship. But luckily, we had gotten there at about 6:50, I think, and there was another boat we had caught up to that because it was the first one to leave Coinjock that we saw pull out, so we followed that one up. And this bridge hadn't opened at all this morning, so even though we were like 15 minutes early, we radioed in. Channel 13's for all of the bridges. We radioed in and asked, could you go ahead and open the bridge now? She was like, oh yeah, sure, we'll open the bridge now. So we got through that one, and that was a swivel bridge of sorts. It spun on the axis right here, so this rotated away from us. And that was a car bridge. And then up here is the North Landing Bridge. This bridge is run by the Army Corps of Engineers, and it only opens at the top of the hour. And we had to wait, I think, 5 minutes because it took us, an hour to get up to this point. Oh, actually, no. This one opened every hour and a half hour, so it was 7:30 when we got here is when this one opened. This one is also a swivel bridge of sorts. It's two parts. Like this one rotated this way, it rotated out, but then in the middle it split and this piece rotated. It was a funky bridge. I don't know why they did it like that. There had to be a reason. A little bit up, this was a train bridge. Train bridges always stay open unless a train is coming, then it closes. So you have to wait for those to open when the train's gone. But this was the other vessel we were going by. There's a fixed bridge up ahead, and then around this fixed bridge was another drawbridge. And then after that drawbridge was the Great Bridge and Lock, and those two open every hour in accordance. So you can see this big bridge up ahead. We fit under it once. There was a low tide, and we had pulled our antenna and everything down, and we're able to go under it. But I'm gonna let this play.
Molly Blossom on 123.
Hey, Molly Blossom Witchcraft. After we go through the bridge, you mind if I sneak in front of you? We're going to be going a little bit faster than you are anyway.
Absolutely not. In fact, we're going to hang out and tie up to the wall, so you can go by whenever you like. Probably best if you could go by on our port side.
Port side, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
I said absolutely not. Like, I was like, no, you can't pass it.
So you can see this bridge is immersive. Those are giant concrete blocks right here that are the counterweights for it. And you'll see some pictures here in a minute. It's a really impressive piece of work here. I mean, it's a ridiculous bridge, and it opens really fast, as you saw in that video. So that was kind of cool, going through that. And then right after that is the Great Bridge Lock. In this case, we go up like only about 18 inches. Just that little bit in elevation change, you have to build a lock for it. And this lock is much bigger because you can fit a barge on the right and a barge on the left. So that's a lot bigger that way. And it's a very small, but I guess going from one river in North Carolina to one river in Virginia involves a slight elevation change, so they had to put the lock in. And this is us coming in the bridge you saw in that last video. We're able to go through this one. We had to take our antenna down, but we're able to go under it. This is the picture, the bridge you saw at the very beginning. And that's us leaving it, a little low bridge. The other ships that you saw that were with us going through Great Bridge had to wait for this one to open, and they had to wait about 20 minutes because I think it was like 9:40 at this point. It was going to open again at 10. So we head back out. We had to cross the James River again. It was really choppy, but we got back in, and we were on the road heading back about noon. See, Smokee and us were coming back on the interstate. So yeah, about noon, and as soon as we got at this point, as we were like coming back home, the couple-hour drive back, I was checking on the radar, and there were storms firing from North Carolina all over. So we made it out of there just in time, or we would have been stuck and had to dock up in one of those little towns along the Albemarle Chesapeake Canal. So once again, there's the Great Bridge and the Great Bridge Lock. You can see all these little roads are all different drawbridges we had to wait to open. So it was quite a fun adventure. It's just fun because it's not every day that you get to go through locks and have drawbridges open for you on your boat. There's Lake Drummond, by the way. There's the campsite we were going to try and go up of. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this wasn't too long. Let me know what you guys think. You want me to do some more stuff like this more often. And I think I might be taking a tour down at the weather station, the National Weather Service station, our local one, sometime in the near future. So I'll probably make a video of that when I go do that in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This was a fun trip, and I will